Welcome to Dubrovnik.
Prime Minister Netanyahu made this announcement just a few days ago of the IDF taking on Rafa, in order to ensure, as I said, a total victory over Hamas. What's the timing on this? When do we expect the IDF to march in there?
Well, at the moment, the Prime Minister has ordered the IDF to draw up a plan for the evacuation of the civilian population from Rafa. We understand that if the army went in all guns a-blazing, that would obviously cause horrific civilian casualties, and we're keen to keep civilians protected. Now, that's a very difficult challenge. It's a challenge because Hamas's whole strategy is to hide underneath and behind civilian facilities to try to use them as human shields. And it's a challenge because UN agencies, unfortunately, have not been cooperating with our efforts to try to get civilians to safety. But we're now
and it's a challenge because you keep bombing civilian targets.
No, it's a challenge because we keep bombing Hamas targets, but Hamas has deliberately embedded itself under civilian areas. Hamas spent the last 16 years building an underground tunnel network 1.5 times the length of the London Underground.
Okay, so we've talked about the tunnels a lot. Has Hamas also, has Hamas built an underground tunnel network under the tent city that is now Rafa?
Well, Hamas has built an underground tunnel network everywhere in Gaza.
But are there tunnels underneath those tents that have been put up in kind of empty spaces in Rafa? Are there tunnels there as well?
We're going to need civilians to get out of the way where Hamas is trying to use them. And where would they go? I don't have an exact map for you.
And where would they go?
Well, that is why instead of going in all guns a-blazing, the Prime Minister has ordered the army to do exactly what you would expect a professional law-abiding army to do, and that is to draw up plans for the protection of the civilian population, because we do not want them to be harmed, despite Hamas's efforts to use them as human shields.
But where would these people go? Because they're in Rafah, because that's where you told them to go, because that was supposedly a safe area, and now it's not. So where would they go?
When this war began, when Hamas launched the October 7 massacre, we made clear there would be no hiding place anywhere in Gaza for Hamas. We're going to destroy the whole of the Hamas military. We began the operation in the north and again gave precaution and warning for civilians to evacuate because we didn't want them in harm's way, even though in some cases Hamas was using them as human shields. As for where they will go now in Rafah, as we move to destroy the last 4 Hamas battalions standing, that is part of the plan that the IDF will have to present to the government in order to keep the civilian population protected, because we do not want them to.
But we all know that we're all pretty familiar now with the geography of Gaza, which is, as we keep saying, not very big. It would fit into the M25. Where would they go? I mean, 60% of the buildings have been destroyed. Infrastructure's been destroyed. Just tell me, from your understanding of the geography of Gaza, where they would go and where would be safe for 1.4 million people.
You've asked me the same question now 4 or 5 times.
But you haven't given me an answer, that's why.
Because the Prime Minister has ordered the IDF to come up with a plan for where they should go. Because that is part of what it means to be a professional, law-abiding military, trying to conduct a campaign in conditions that no army in the history of the world has ever had to deal with terrorist enemies so deeply embedded in civilian areas. We are well aware of the challenges of trying to keep civilians on the other side protected when their own government, Hamas, is trying to use them as human shields. We're acutely aware of that challenge, Matt.
I ask you again, because we all know what we're talking about. Where do you think they might be able to find safety in the Gaza Strip when the supposedly safe place has now become a target?
Well, there are open areas in the Gaza Strip, and one option is for UN agencies to work together with us on evacuating civilians to open areas where Hamas can't use them as human shields.
Like where?
I'll remind you at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the war, we designated the Al-Mawasi zone in southwestern Gaza, for example, as a safe zone. Unfortunately, Hamas then started shooting rockets from out of what we had designated as a safe zone. And we very much hope that now, during the advance on Rafah, UN agencies are going to cooperate with our attempts to try to keep civilians safe and keep them out of Hamas strongholds, where it is deliberately and cynically and evilly trying to keep them in harm's way. Because, man, Hamas has only 2 strategies to try to survive this war. One of those strategies is to keep holding on to the 136 hostages we fear it is torturing and raping and starving and executing in its terror dungeons and use them as leverage to survive this war. And its other strategy is to hide behind civilians. That's why all of the tunnel shafts that we have found in Gaza, thousands of them, poke out inside schools and hospitals, universities and clinics, because Hamas's strategy is based on launching attacks and then retreating behind civilians in order to try to render its military assets immune from attack.
Indeed, and I'm sure that's what they're doing. And of course, they should be releasing the hostages. They should be releasing the hostages immediately. They should be releasing those hostages immediately, and it's and it's a tragedy for the families that they haven't done so yet. But at the same time, there are 26,500 Palestinians who are dead. 2/3 of them are women and children. These are numbers not contested by your best friends.
Hamas.
Yeah, I know, but they're not contested by according to the State Department. That would be the U.S. State Department. They think those numbers are actually low. They probably think there are another 7,000 or so dead, buried under the rubble. Your best friend, President Biden, has said that your response in Gaza has been over the top, right? So when your best friend is saying that repeatedly, actually in the last few months, do you ever bother to listen?
First of all, I'm not sure that you're quoting the president correctly in context.
It's an exact correct. He used the words over the top on Thursday night in the press conference.
Correct. In response, yes, he used those words in response to a question about Hamas's response in the hostage negotiations, and that would seem to be broadly consistent with Secretary Blinken's statement that Hamas's response contains some clear non-starters. The United States has stood by our side since the beginning of this war, and I think just yesterday, John Kirby from the National Security Council made clear in a press conference that the United States will continue to make sure that Israel has all the munitions it needs in order to defend itself against Hamas in the wake of the October 7 massacre.
When your best friends in Washington are telling you that your response, your military response in the Gaza Strip, causing thousands of civilian casualties, is over the top or is excessive, or whatever words they're using in private that we don't even know about, but I suspect that there's quite a lot of criticism going on. I just wonder at what stage does Israel, which relies heavily on the United States for financial and military support and political support, at what stage does your government, do you start to listen?
We've been listening very closely to the Americans, and I'll give you a fantastic example.
That's not what they think, by the way.
Well, at the beginning of the war, we had American generals who came to Israel so we could learn lessons from their own counterterrorism wars. We heard about how they improved their MO between the first Battle of Fallujah, the next Battle of Fallujah in Mosul to try to keep civilians protected. We're trying to learn from their international experiences. But we are dealing now with a unique counterterrorism war of a sort that no army in history has ever had to deal with. It took the Iraqi army, with the support of 85 nations, 9 months to dispel 3,000 ISIS fighters from Mosul, and that came at the cost of 11,000 civilian casualties. And they were doing so in a world in which the enemy had not spent 16 years deliberately embedding itself under civilian infrastructure while holding 100 hostages and lobbing rockets at the other country's home front. The challenge that we are dealing with is unique. And when people come and look at the truly heartbreaking scenes inside Gaza and accuse Israel of responsibility for civilian casualties, instead of pointing the finger at Hamas, the terrorist army that launched a war from behind those civilians and tells us it wants to perpetrate those massacres again and again, they are telling terrorists that a human shield strategy works. They are telling it that if they hide behind enough civilians, the international community will tell whatever army is from the country that they have been attacking, you have to stop and you cannot defend yourselves because that human shield strategy works. We're trying desperately to thwart that human shield.
I just wonder, I'm still puzzled, having dealt with this story now for months, I'm still puzzled about the, Israel's strategy and all this when it says it wants to achieve total victory. And you used to be very effective, very ruthless, very surgical at taking out your enemies, whether they were Hamas leaders or in the old days PLO leaders, with targeted killings, targeted assassinations. As far as we know, you've not actually killed any of the three big Hamas guns that you're looking for. And I just wonder whether it's ever crossed your mind that killing thousands of civilians, most of them innocent civilians, unless, of course, you think they're not innocent. But most of them, let's say innocent civilians, is just counterproductive. Apart from being immoral, it's just bad policy. And it makes your future less secure, not more secure.
Matt, in the wake of the October 7 massacre, when Hamas brutally slaughtered, raped, and burned alive 1,200 people in Israel, the Israeli army launched a campaign to destroy Hamas and bring back the hostages. Those are goals that can only be achieved through a military campaign. There was no way to stand quietly by the sidelines and ask Hamas to give them back and to dismantle itself.
But you got the first batch you got back through negotiation. You got the first batch of hostages back through a negotiation.
Correct.
And since then it hasn't worked. I just wonder whether you're barking up the wrong tree here.
Through negotiations that were facilitated through the application of massive military pressure. Because what did Hamas want in exchange for releasing 10 hostages a day? It wanted a one-day pause in the fighting. It was feeling the unrelenting military pressure of the Israeli army, and in exchange for a day to catch its breath, it was willing to release hostages. And that is our strategy, to continue applying unrelenting military pressure to get the hostages out. Now, Matt,
Can I just interrupt you briefly there? But the hostage families don't think that strategy is working, because they're mad as hell with your government, aren't they?
The hostage families have every right to do everything in their power to try to get their friends and family back, but they understand that the only way we're going to get them back is through unrelenting military pressure. Because if we were to stand by the sidelines and say, hey, Hamas, we think you accidentally took a few of our civilians hostage on October 7th. Would you mind giving them back to us?
Well, no one is suggesting that you say that either. That's just silly, isn't it? I just wonder, finally, because we're running out of time as well.
Clearly, the people who do not think that Israel should be launching a ground offensive in Gaza do think that Israel should simply ask Hamas to give the hostages back. But I'm still trying to answer your previous question.
It's a negotiation, just like the last one. It's a tough negotiation.
Negotiation facilitated through military pressure. And I think it's really tragic that when we had a negotiated framework in place at the end of November to continue getting hostages back, Hamas decided at the end to stop releasing hostages as agreed and to resume rocket fire on December 1st, when we had a framework in place that would have extended the humanitarian pause past the 1st of December in exchange for getting more hostages out. Hamas started this war with the October 7 massacre, and it restarted this war when it stopped handing back hostages on December 1st.
So just finally, Eylon, just again, because I haven't really understood what's going on here, and I've tried really, really hard. Is the strategy here that by creating so much damage in the Gaza Strip, you hope to basically turn the population of Gaza against Hamas? You know, because ultimately, if Hamas hadn't attacked you as brutally as they did on October the 7th, they would not be suffering these appalling conditions right now. Is that the strategy? And do you actually think that will work? Or will people actually forget about the fact that it was Hamas who started all this and blame you more than them?
No, that is not the strategy. The strategy is to systematically dismantle Hamas's military and governing infrastructure. Hamas started this war with 24 battalions. We have now shattered 18 of those battalions. There are 2 remaining in Khan Yunis and 4 in Rafa. The strategy was to send in the military in order to fight against the Hamas terrorists and the vast underground tunnel network that they built under civilian areas, hoping to keep those military assets immune from an Israeli response. And we're now very close to a total Israeli victory over Hamas, and that is why we appear to be approaching an advance on Rafa, because the last 4 battalions that have not yet been destroyed are trying to use human shields. And I think the international community now faces a very stark choice. Does it want to try to save Hamas, or does it want to try to save civilians in Gaza? If it wants to save civilians, it needs to work with us as we make efforts to get those civilians out of harm's way, out of areas where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields, so we can continue dismantling the Hamas military.
So are you hoping that Egypt will open its doors and allow people into Egypt? Is that what you're still hoping for?
We, since the beginning of this war, have been urging Palestinians to move to other areas inside the Gaza Strip, where Hamas has not been using them.
But they keep doing that. They keep getting bombed in those areas. That's what I said half an hour ago. Anyway, listen. I think we've run out. I think we've run out of time. But just very briefly, if I may, as a matter of on the record here, do you now think that the ceasefire that was in the offing some time ago, in a deal to release all the hostages, is now off the table? Is that not happening at all?
I think, as Secretary Blinken said, it contains some clear non-starters. We're close to a total Israeli victory, and what Hamas offered was complete capitulation that we don't think would help us get the hostages out at all. And so we're continuing to put military pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, and this war will end with the total destruction of Hamas's military machine. The answer to the October 7 massacre cannot be for Hamas to declare victory or even claim that it drew this to a draw.
Got to leave it there. Thank you for your time, Eylon Levy, the Israeli government spokesman. And we're going to hopefully...
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.